Welcome to the heart of the museum, one of my favorite places, one of the places that inspire me the most. And from here arise many of the projects we develop around or in favor of Guatemala's Maya textile tradition. Today, I have the pleasure of sharing with you or showing you a few examples that are part of this collection of over 8,000 pieces. I will also have the pleasure of showing you the different packing and storage systems we use to protect and preserve this textile heritage. To start, I would like to tell you that the Ixchel Museum of Indigenous Dress was founded in 1977. Since then, the Textile Committee, which began with creating the space of the museum, had always thought about documenting the changes that have occurred in the textile tradition. And that's why this collection is accomplishing that task. So it will be an honor, as I've stated, to be able to share with you some of the pieces we have in this collection. I would also know that this collection comprises around 8,000 pieces that represent 187 different communities. Among the pieces in this collection, we find huipiles, over-huipiles, cortes, sachets, and pants. So let's look at some examples. Such as this weaving here. This is an over-huipil from Quetzaltenango that was woven on a treadle loom and was made with 3 cloth panels. The brocades are made of silk. The embroidery of the randa, which is in this part here, is made with cotton threads. The collar, which is spectacular, is embroidered on the fabric, also by hand, and is different from the ones used today. Nowadays, they are embroidered on commercial fabric that is later applied onto the collar. Notice that this huipila is very wide, and more so that it is long. Currently, in this community, huipiles are made longer than they are wide. As I mentioned, the purpose of this collection is to document the changes that have occurred in the textile tradition. And this is a clear example. Later, we will do an exercise with other pieces to really show us the changes that have taken place. Here, we have a corte from Salcajá, which is often worn in Totonicapan. Notice this corte has a different color palette. Softer, right? And the jaspe designs are also made more basic. Today, the jaspe technique, which is a resist dye technique, has gone through many changes. For example, this corte I'm wearing features a much more complex jaspe technique. And this is part of the modernity we can find in different communities. We can also find headdresses, like this tupuy from Coan, Alta Verapaz. This headdress from San Andres, Sacabaja, has metallic threads. The suit we see over there is from Zacualpa, Quiché, a huipil from Santa Cruz, Quiché, and a shirt that I find spectacular. All the pieces contribute to the collection and provide important information. This shirt was completely woven on a backstrap loom with naturally brown cotton called cuyuscate, a fiber that can no longer be found in the market. In the collection, we can find pieces from around the end of the 1800s to this day, such as this lovely huipil from Misco, Guatemala, from the Pocoman community. That features a very delicate weaving because for this piece, which is made on the backstrap loom, they used a single ply yarn in the warp and weft. It is also hand embroidered with the cotton dyed with the plico purpura patula snail. It has sequin applications and the color has lace, which is almost disintegrated due to the age of this piece. So this is one of the oldest pieces we have. Currently, I have not seen a huipil like this one in Misco. I know women in cofradías wear a similar one, but pieces like this are very rare in Guatemala. We have one, and I have seen another in the National Museum of Archaeology and Ethnology. So those two are the ones that I am certain that exist in Guatemala. I want to show you another piece I find very interesting because we do technical ethnographic study of the pieces. Because it's not just the object that's important, but also the people or the wearers. Even the pieces or the huipiles can give us a lot of information about how they were used. We know this one is a ceremonial huipil, and that is worn in one of the cofradías in Misco. I'm going to move to this piece. And I'm going to ask Susana to help me with this very large huipil. And I want to show you because it has some very, very interesting information. There we go. It's quite a large piece. And this is a huipil from Our Lady of the Rosary from San Pedro Zacatepeques. As I mentioned, our collection has been built by donations made to us from private collectors. And in some cases, we have been able to acquire pieces to integrate into the collection. This piece is made of 3 cloth panels. The central panel, which is the one we're going to look at, and the 2 lateral panels. It's very interesting because it has 3 holes. This main one is for the Virgin's head, and these 2 are there because Our Lady of the Rosary carries the Christ child in one of her arms. So one of these holes is for the child's head, and the other is for the Virgin's arm. We know that this piece is from 1939 because it says so here. And we have all this very interesting information. And we also have the certainty that this piece is of Our Lady of the Rosary because it also says so here. Our Lady of the Rosary of San Pedro Zacatepeques, October 7th, 1939. Surely, this piece was worn by the Virgin then, and it was probably made at that time also. The price wasn't included, but it would have also been interesting to know. We know who the people in this cofradía were because this piece has the first and last names of at least some of its members. Although I think it's probably all of the members of the cofradía of Our Lady of the Rosary. If we analyze this piece ethnographically, it holds a lot of information. But if we analyze it from a technical perspective, it can also give us a wealth of details. We can analyze the fibers, the dyes, the size, the shape, the size of the designs. So each piece gives us an abundance of information for the objective of documenting the textile tradition. Ultimately, the purpose of this is to educate and to share with our visitors and everyone who is interested in the information we have and collect through the studies we carry out. I have been talking about changes in the textile tradition. So now we're going to do an exercise to see how a community has transformed so much regarding the different aspects of a piece. One of the oldest pieces, speaking of the 1970s, is this one. Notice that the figures or brocades are minimalistic. The color palette they use is intensely red, orange red. Then we have this other piece, which is approximately from 1990, probably. Here we see a change in both in the base fabric design and the figures of the brocades it features. They are denser here. It's still red. We have the presence of acrylic threads. And these 2, we were just in Santiago, Chimaltenango, which is where these huipiles come from. We can see floral motifs. Floral motifs made with the marcador technique, as they call it, were widely used. That is, they are widely used in San Antonio, Aguascalientes, but they are also often used in San Juan, Comalapa. So we see how communities influence each other's textile designs in modern times. That is to say, currently speaking of the present, this had to be around 2017-18. We see much larger brocades, much broader designs. floral motifs that the first two didn't have. We notice a change in the color red, which now tends to be more of a crimson than red, which is different from the others. And here we see once again that even though the format, the shape, or the design of the huipil stayed the same, the color used is more crimson. We see larger designs. Again, we notice the presence of acrylic fibers and so on. In other communities like Solola, for example, the huipiles also have sleeves like this. Notice that fortunately, it keeps the garment's original format characteristics: the size, the neck, and the sleeves. In contrast to other communities, for example, in the case of Solola, women also wear the huipil like this one, with 3/4 length sleeves. However, some women no longer wear the sleeves. It has become a rectangular huipil, if we will, with a round or square neck. Now they embroider it with flowers and other motifs, but they have removed the sleeves. I just want to make it clear I'm not talking about the entire community, only some women who we have noticed dressing like this. Another example of the changes that have occurred is San Pedro Necta, Huehuetenango, where we see this huipil with its traditional design. The eyelet neck, the brocaded designs are small. The color is browner in comparison to this piece we found in 2023. When we were in San Pedro Necta, notice that the design is much larger, more elevated, with more volume, and they are adding new designs to their piece. But the most interesting are the shoulders. They have made openings, different designs on the fabric. Fashion. Modernity is reaching different parts of the community in the textile tradition. It's part of the dynamics of fashion. I call it fashion because this is what people say in the different communities when we ask them why these changes are taking place. And the answer is that they are fashionable, or that they like them. The Maya textile tradition of Guatemala has so much information. There's much to study about the tradition. There's much to learn about the communities. There's much to learn about the techniques, the weavings. There's so much information. However, because of time constraints, we are going to end that topic here. And we're going to move on onto looking at the packing and storage systems we have for each of the pieces to ensure their conservation. We use conservation-grade materials, acid-free materials that are adequate for each of the pieces. That is, if it's a wool piece, we use materials that are appropriate for wool. If it's silk, we use materials that are appropriate for silk. If it's cotton, we use materials that are specifically suited for these type of fibers. I'm going to do an exercise so you can see how we have stored some of the pieces. I'll start by showing you what's in the box. I also want to see it because there are times when I no longer remember what's in the boxes. So in this box, which is box number 10, it's important for conservation purposes to also number and code, so we clearly know where all the pieces are stored and we don't have to be looking for them in a disorganized manner. Because this is a part of the conservation process that we do. The commitment we have is to ensure that these pieces last longer so that future generations have access to the information contained and what is kept in the museum. First, the box is acid-free. The paper is acid-free. The pieces stored here are made of cotton or acrylic fibers. I don't know right now. Right now we'll see with each piece we're going to take out. From what I see, these are lovely pieces that fortunately we didn't see in the first phase. So now we're going to have the opportunity to do so. I'm going to take out some of the pieces. They are miniatures, but they have a purpose. Usually, these pieces are made for the image of saints in Catholic churches. As I mentioned, weavings, or the textile tradition itself, truly have a wealth of information, and we often must select what to study when it's research year. And many gaps remain. For example, in this case, the only thing I can say is that this is a saint's shirt from the Sololá area. We do not specifically know from which saint it is because the research has not been carried out. But the detail is gorgeous. It has sleeves, the collar. Here we see some metallic threads. How do we store this piece? We must create specific supports to minimize the risk of deterioration. For example, we do not want to fold it. Because of its size, the shirt is stored open. But if it were a shirt from a normal person, a standard-sized person would have to fold it a little. And to do that, we now create a support. So, we have this shirt. It has a support made of acid-free paper because the wadding allows for air to flow. The same goes for the sleeves. Now we've placed it. Even the collar has its own support so that it doesn't fold. And then we place acid-free paper, and we also include its inventory number and the origin. This is extremely important, documenting everything that's in the box. We can see that there are also other pieces, and they always have their inventory number and origin. It's crucial to also consider the state of conservation. If the pieces of this box have a state of conservation of 1, that means that the piece requires a lot of care, and we can't place other pieces on it. This box contains several pieces, and that's because they are small and don't weigh a lot. They are in a good state of conservation, and that's why it is possible to store several pieces in here. The box is well identified. It has a number, a photograph with the code for the piece. On this side, it has a number. I mean, the list of pieces that are stored in the box. So, we really do try to have everything properly identified to facilitate access or searching. We're going to put this away now and go on to another example. As I have mentioned, each piece is studied to determine what kind of packing we need. Usually, the ones that go in boxes are pieces that have sewing, like huipiles, and can't go in a tube. The pieces that go in tubes, like these for example, are what I called flat pieces. For example, the cortes, suut, perrajes, and so on. Let's look at what we have here. It's indicated here that these are cortes. When I'm speaking of cortes, or of flat pieces, I'm referring to pieces that have no sewing. They don't have a randa, so they can go in a tube. The color of the ribbon we put on it depends on the piece. We know that the green or orange ribbons tell us that there are cortes stored here. If it were a pink ribbon, we would know that those are suit, and so each one is assigned a color. We wear gloves to handle the pieces. They must be made of cotton. Cotton has worked very well for us, but there are times when we need to make certain decisions because there are pieces that are not so easy to manipulate wearing gloves. And so we take other measures to be able to handle them without doing damage. Here we have a corte. We're going to ask Susana for help, because that's another thing about conservation work. It's impossible for a single person to be able to work with the large pieces on their own. We make sure that it's always 2 people working together to be able to pack and store these pieces because they are enormous. Otherwise, we would damage the piece. This is a corte from Santa Maria Cauque, if I'm not mistaken. Notice that it's perfectly preserved, and this piece has been stored in this system for quite a while. We might often think that there's a fixed rule that establishes that all the cortes must go in a tube because they are flat. But it's not applicable in all cases because some have very large randas and seams, and that could result in the deformation of the piece if it's placed in a tube. So we need to study the piece and establish what kind of packing system we can use to store it. This is one example of a corte, but there are cortes from Alta Verapaz that are pleated and have many folds. We're going to leave it here. We're going to pack it again and take it away to show you another packing system for cortes, only this time it's for pleated cortes. It's also identified. It has its photos and the card with its conservation code. Now let's look at this other system. For this corte, we have created a bag system. To be honest, this was a very particular case because of the way the pleats are made in these cortes. This is a corte from Quetzaltenango. We left it like this after understanding, although the case of Quetzaltenango is different, but with cortes from Coan, for example, that the pleats, the corte comes like this, flat fabric. For the Coan cortes, they place a string in the center to make the pleats. They pull and it automatically turns into a pleated skirt. But for the fabric to fall like you see in these cortes, the technique to achieve that fall is to apply force on the cortes, which means that we're damaging the fibers, and that's why we decided to store it in its traditional form. We could have stored the corte flat, open. Like this, to eliminate the folds. We're preventing folds in the fibers. But when we thought about being able to use it in an exhibition, we would have to apply that pressure that I just showed. And that would have been more damaging to the piece. So that's why we decided to store it like this, in its traditional form. Just like the women from Alta Verapaz and Coban do it. Here we have a bag that was designed to store this kind of cortes. Another kind of packing, the ones that are always stored in a bag. Ribbons. Most ribbons are stored in tubes, like the cortes. However, there are cases in which we also need to make decisions and look at the conditions of the piece. For example, with this one. Although I just said that ribbons are stored in tubes, there are very special cases and we need to study them. Like the example of the pleated corte. Here we have some ribbons. Why do we store them in a box? Because we found that these ribbons have many details that require care. This is a ribbon from San Juan La Laguna. I'm going to take out one from San Cristobal Totonicapan, which I'm sure has very particular detail. This is a ribbon from San Cristobal Totonicapan. Look. In addition to being a flat ribbon, it has tassels, but it also has, let's open one of these, it has long fringes. And it has another very particular detail besides the long fringes. Let's open this. It has chains made with silver thread. The metal thread is easier to break, so that's why we store it like this, in a box and not in a tube. And that's another way in which we store pieces in this collection. We can also look at an example of a ribbon and a tube in a bag. Come with me. We're going a little deeper in the collection. I'm going to take out a bag. This, for example, this type of bag is also for storing these kinds of ribbons, which are too big, with a lot of volume. This is a sash, but it has a very similar shape to that of a ribbon. We have lots of tassels here, and we must protect. And this is the way it was determined that the packing and storing systems should be. The flat part of the sash is rolled up while always caring for the pompons, and the acid-free cotton cloth was made for it. Everything we make and all the materials we use, as I mentioned, are conservation grade. Part of the process or of the activities we carry out regarding the conservation of the pieces is photography. The photographic documentation is very important because it allows us to avoid handling the piece, which is why we have a special equipment for the photographic documentation and a professional photographer. We take photographs, at least 4 of each piece, and a maximum of 16. To document the history of the piece, be it because of its shape, size, color, because of the damage it has, or because of the aesthetic. We document everything we can from the piece, photographically speaking. Another interesting piece of information, and with this I will finish today's presentation, is that we make a very detailed technical sheet for each of the pieces. The sheets have 400 fields that cover the inventory number, the piece, the origin, the linguistic community. If the piece is for ceremonial or everyday use, the different measurements of the piece, the materials, the twist of materials, the number of threads by square centimeter, the technical notes, and the fieldwork notes that greatly complement the card. It's also important to know that all the information we have is corroborated by the communities. The communities as an important part of this process. We often invite people from the communities so that they can help us identify and correctly classify the pieces, because they are our primary source, and it's our responsibility to divulge the information we have and collect to our visitors, to the people who want to learn more about the textile tradition. And that's why the community's participation is of utmost importance to us. That's our little presentation for today, a summary. A review of the collection that is the heart of the Ixchel Museum. Thank you for joining us. We hope you'll visit us soon here at the Ixchel Museum. And we hope you enjoy this tour of our main collection.